Have you ever wondered how scientists figure out which species are related? Or why some animals have similar characteristics, like birds, bats, and butterflies, but are placed in different groups? What about these animals? Where would you group the red panda? It's a tough choice. I'm gonna have to think about that one. Making these determinations is where a scientific field called phylogeny comes in. Phylogeny helps scientists understand how living things are connected through evolution, giving us clues about the past and helping us make sense of the present. Scientists use a phylogenetic tree to help visualize which species have recent common ancestors. Phylogenetic trees represent relational evidence between organisms. The tree has a root, branches, and nodes. The nodes represent the common ancestors that organisms share. The branches denote the lineage or descent of the organism. And the root of the entire tree represents the common ancestor of every organism included in the phylogenetic tree. This gives a visual of how organisms are related over time. There are several types of evidence that scientists use to build phylogenetic trees. First, paleontology. Fossils can show similarities between extinct species and modern ones. However, fossils aren't always easy to find, and the fossil record is incomplete. Still, they are an important part of the phylogenetic tree. Another component is comparative morphology. Scientists compare the bodily structure of organisms to see how similar or different they are, and if these structures are homologous or analogous in nature. Homologous structures are those that arise from a recent common ancestor, while analogous structures come from a need to exist within the same environment with no recent common ancestor. So let's go back to the example of the bird, bat, and butterfly. Though all of their wings have the function of flight, the wing structure of the bird and bat are homologous to each other, while the butterfly is analogous to the bird and bat. Even though more anatomical similarities between organisms can point to a common ancestor, they can be less reliable than DNA evidence. Scientists study DNA and protein sequencing to compare different species. The more similar the sequence, the more closely related the species are likely to be. These studies at the molecular level are a powerful tool in modern biology. The common ancestors do tell us where species come from. Yet, looking forward, you will see that species change when environments change and/or organisms are separated from others in their species. Scientists call this separation-isolation. Species can be isolated by geographic location, by time, or by behaviors. The Georgia Museum of Natural History shows real examples of how scientists use phylogenetic trees in their daily work.
A phylogenetic tree to scientists like myself looks a lot like a giant oak tree with all of the different limbs sticking out in different directions. Each tip of a limb represents a species or a taxon that we're interested in studying. And then the relationship of those limbs, some of them join maybe halfway down a much larger limb, and then that larger limb joins the trunk low down on the tree. That topology, that shape, describes the relationship of how we try to describe the evolutionary pattern of species that are closely related. That branching pattern not only tells us who is most closely related to one another, but it also tells us roughly the time at which different species originated. And once we understand the phylogenetic tree of a group of organisms, we can map traits like whether they have a certain type of reproductive mode, whether they have certain leaf shape. The main thing that we look for are what we call shared derived traits. We're looking for the things that have evolved from some common ancestor prior to that and are now shared in a group of organisms. And we want to understand that they are, first of all, homologous, that they have some common evolutionary origin, that we're not comparing bird wings to bat wings to bee wings. Or it can get much more complicated and mathematical as we build in knowledge about how particular traits change. The models change by how much data we can collect. So if you're doing a very simple morphological analysis of how a group of plants or sea stars or some other set of organisms are related, there may be only a few dozen traits that are easy to measure. Once we've gotten into the world of using molecular data to understand how organisms are related phylogenetically, we're often working with hundreds or thousands, or these days, the whole genomes of organisms. As we have an incredible amount of data and we know more and more about the patterns of certain types of mutations or certain types of changes among organisms, we can start to use much more sophisticated search algorithms for all the possible phylogenetic topologies that could explain the relationship of species. When we find a lot of species that are very closely related in one region, that often means that speciation has driven that. That's very different than if unrelated species are causing the richness or diversity. A great example of that from right here in Georgia are the freshwater mussels that are endemic to the rivers and streams of Georgia. That diversity, we think, not only sort of provides an idea of how complementary species can be in using different resources in an ecosystem, it also usually confers more stability on that community or ecosystem, such that if there's a perturbation, a huge storm, or a fire, or something else that tends to knock that community down, a more diverse community is going to be more resilient and is going to be able to recover from that faster than one that's been heavily impacted.
Okay, based on what I just saw, I think I know for sure where the red panda goes. Why don't you investigate and see where you think it fits? It's awesome to see concepts we learn in school actually used in scientists' daily work. Even more amazing is that evidence of life from millions of years ago can still affect our lives and the world today. Well, that's it for this episode of Biology Revealed. Remember to stay curious, and I will see you next time.